This is episode 33 with Zephan Blaxberg.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Brian Tier.
Hey guys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, episode 33 today, and I'm doing something a little different for this one and featuring an interview I did on Zephan Blaxberg's podcast, The Year of Purpose. Now, in case you're not familiar with Zephan, he was a guest on the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast back in episode 12, which I'll link in the show notes. But in that interview, we shared, his quarter life journey of going from an unhappy employee to a self-employed entrepreneur, traveler, and podcaster. His work has even been featured in major sporting venues around America, as well as in the White House. And in this interview, we switched roles as Zephan interviewed me about my story on his podcast and how I've gone from the corporate engineering world to become a coach and a podcast host, including all the unsexy stepping stones in between. I got pretty vulnerable in this interview and shared things that I haven't shared elsewhere before. So if you think that, the path to discovering and living your purpose is easy, then you need to give this one a listen. In this interview, you're going to learn the moment I decided to quit my job, my dad's 3 reasons to quit your job, why you shouldn't quit just yet, how to explain your dreams and goals to your parents, partner, or spouse when it feels like no one gets it, and what I learned from traveling solo. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at briantier.com/033. But for now, let's go hang out with Zephan.
Brian, thanks so much for being here today. What's going on in the life of Brian right now?
The life of Brian. Zephan, thanks so much for having me and for that cool intro. I'm really happy to be here. I love your work, and obviously I was really excited to interview you on my podcast, so it's cool to be here. And hello to all the YOP listeners.
Yeah, man. So first of all, because you have such an awesome accent, we have to tell people where you're calling in from.
I am in Cape Town in South Africa. I was born here, grew up here, have plans to see many different parts of the world still. But yeah, I rock the South African accent, which I don't think sounds like an accent, but obviously to everyone else it does.
Well, I'm sure it sounds like I have an accent to you. So, but isn't this cool that we get to talk to people, other side of the world, totally different time zones? I'm sure it's like probably the end of the day for you, and I'm just getting the day started. So that's
yeah,
cool,
man, I love it. It's kind of like. When I started a podcast, I said there were 3 things or 3 reasons why. The one was that I didn't need to be the expert. I could get other people on who knew more about their topic than I did. The other one was because I got to ask people things that I wanted to know. And the third was that I get to grow my network and like you said, meet and speak to people on other sides of the world. And it's one of my favorite parts of traveling as well, is like the friendships that I made while I was overseas and backpacking and stuff, and those friendships live on. And I suppose that's the sort of the joy of living in the time we do, is that you don't have to meet someone and then part ways and that's it. You can stay in touch. And another example is I have a pen pal, actually, literally like writing with pen and paper. And
No
we post
way.
letters to each other. Yeah. So when I was backpacking through Southeast Asia 2 years ago, I met up with this group of girls from England. And the one girl said to me, yeah, she used to have a pen pal and it didn't last very long. And then I said, well, I'll do it. And 2 years later, we're still sending letters in the post back and forth. And it's really cool to still interact in that way.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. But, yeah, I mean, like you said, it's really amazing that we get to speak to people and make friends with people on completely other sides of the planet.
Yeah. Well, let's dive in. Let's figure out a little bit more about, how you even got to this whole backpacking around Asia. I want to hear a little bit about what life was like being in the corporate world, where the whole backpacking piece fit in. Where did your mindset start to shift into, this whole new way of thinking? So tell me about the corporate world, what you were doing for work, and, when you ultimately decided something's got to change.
Totally. So I think if I take it way, way back, I grew up in like a really good, happy, big family. I've got 3 brothers. One of them's a twin. And, we were brought up really well. I'm really grateful to my parents for the background, the upbringing that we had. And I kind of went through early stages of life doing all the things that we're supposed to, or that we are told we are supposed to do, and not just by our parents, but like by society and media and all that sort of thing. So I did really well at school and played sports. I went to a really good university, did really well there as well, and then got a really good job. At university, when I finished high school, my dad was really old school, so it was kind of like, I'll pay for you to go to university, but it must be one of the sort of good careers like engineering, law, medicine, accounting, that type of thing. So I actually didn't know what I wanted to do when I finished school. But one of my older brothers, he did civil engineering, and him and I are very similar. So I decided, well, maybe that's for me. And I did that at university, studied it for 4 years, did really well. And then went into the working world. So I was a civil engineer for about 2 and a bit years. And I never really stopped to think, like, is this actually what I want to be doing? I was just, like I said, sort of checking all the boxes and going along each next step. And I think it was my roommate from university. We were sort of trail running through the mountains during our one holiday, and he said to me, he's always wanted to do a Thailand backpacking trip, and he basically got me to commit. And then that was the end of 2012. We went to Thailand for a couple of weeks, 4 of us, and then just before I left, one of my friends started a CrossFit box. It was like the start of the CrossFit boom.
Yeah.
And CrossFit and paleo, and when that whole thing blew up. And I'd always been interested in staying healthy and sort of personal development and stuff. And when he but sort of made me aware of CrossFit and paleo, it really opened my eyes to how there's so many things we're being told diet-wise and exercise-wise, which maybe aren't as effective as they should be. And we don't have to get into the nutrition space. It's a really hot topic, obviously. Yeah. But although I didn't become a CrossFitter or anything like that, I just started doing a lot more research and changing up my own training and diet and stuff. And I'd never really read blogs or spent much time online. I was always more the ball sports type person than the sort of internet computer person. But when I started doing this research, I started finding all these things and experienced really good benefits myself health-wise, and wanted a way to share that with other people. So I started a blog back then. And the more I started reading online about this stuff, I started reading other stuff too. Things like Live Your Legend, which I'm sure all your listeners will be aware of.
Yeah, Scott Dinsmore.
Yeah, Live Your Legend and Pay to Exist and stuff like that. And seeing people writing stories about making a dent in the world and getting paid to do what they love and making a difference. And these are all things that started opening my eyes, and I was like, geez, well, these people are doing it. Like, why can I not do something like this? And that's when I started thinking, well, am I actually doing something that really lights me up, that I'm really passionate about? And civil engineering was not that thing. So I'll try to keep this a bit short. I messaged my dad. I started getting really miserable. Like, I'd wake up in the morning, immediately dreading going to work. When I'd get to work, I'd be like, okay, 7 hours left, 6 hours left, 5, which is a terrible place to be in. And eventually I just sent my dad a message, and I was terrified what he'd say, because I said he was very old school.
Right.
And I just said to him, like, Dad, there's something I need to tell you. I think you possibly know what it's about, but I'm thinking of resigning because I'm really not happy at work. And something really surprising happened. I thought he'd come at me with like, you're being ungrateful, or that's just the way life works, and suck it up. But actually, he took the sort of business owner's approach, because he was like a director of a couple of companies before he'd retired. And he said to me, if you're not growing, you're not adding value to the business, or you're not enjoying what you're doing, the admirable thing to do is to resign. But not enough people do, because they're just happy to cash their check at the end of the month. But by doing so, you're not helping yourself, and you're also not helping the company. You know, if you're just there wasting time and they're paying you to kind of procrastinate, you're not really helping anybody. And when he said that, it was kind of like the validation I needed. And we shouldn't really need other people's validation, but I mean, it did still mean a lot to me. 30 minutes later, I'd handed in my letter of resignation. And that a month after that, I'd resigned with no real plan B, which, if people are listening to this and are looking for someone to tell them they don't need a plan B, I don't mean that to come across that way. I tell people now, like, if at all possible, start something on the side while you're still in your job, because it does cause a lot of stress down the line.
Yeah.
And I know we can probably get into that, but a great way now that I like to think about it is look at your employer as kind of an investor in your side gig. They paying you to learn these skills that you can eventually use in your own business, and they also paying your bills so that you don't have your side gig stressing you out to make money. And then, so once I'd resigned, it was again my dad who said, well, now that you've resigned, are you going to go travel a little bit? Which also took me by surprise. I think he thought I'd probably go to Europe for 2 weeks, but I ended up going to Southeast Asia for 2 months on my own, just with the bag on my back. I didn't check in any luggage. It was all hand luggage.
Wow.
And a really funny thing happened. The movie that was playing on the airplane was The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And when I watched it, I was like, man, this is too weird. But anyway, so while I was away, I kind of realized that health and personal development was the area that I had always been the most interested in and wanted to get into. So when I came back, I studied and became a certified personal trainer and started doing that. That led to more health coaching. And the health coaching led to life coaching, which is, I mean, I don't really like the term life coaching, but it's the most accurate describer of what I do now. And yeah, I mean, when I relaunched my blog or my brand, which was the beginning of this year, I decided that I was trying to speak to too many people at once about too many things. So I did a complete rebrand to my personal brand now, which is just briantier.com.
Nice.
And and I thought, who can I speak to? What group can I really focus on where I think I'll have the most impact and can make the most difference? And I did a lot of brainstorming. I mean, I'm into a lot of different things like minimalism and Stoic philosophy and obviously health and nutrition. But I decided to focus on 20-somethings and the sort of quarter life crisis that people speak about. And yeah, I mean, it's been a really cool journey. I also decided to focus on podcasting rather than writing articles and stuff like I did on my old site. And that itself has been an awesome journey. But that's pretty much where I am today.
Good stuff.
That was a long story, but yeah.
Well, you brought up quite a few important things, but one big thing that I want to jump back to, I actually just wrote down a quick note, is, you mentioned Live Your Legend. And if anybody who's listening hasn't heard this story or doesn't know about this, Live Your Legend was founded by a guy by the name of Scott Dinsmore. And basically over a decade of research led him to create a process for making discoveries about, what lit himself up and what lights others up, and for finding the work that they really love. And unfortunately, just last year, September of 2015, he passed away in a really tragic accident. He was actually summiting Mount Kilimanjaro with his wife and a bunch of friends to really kind of carry on the message of live your legend. And I think there was like an avalanche or a rock slide or something.
A rock fall, yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think he was actually hit trying to protect other people. So he was 33 years old. He's got a TEDx talk that's been seen like over 7 million times. And it's just super important to kind of mention that because it's really in alignment with where we're all at here is, at 33, he could probably say that he really lived the most fulfilling life. I mean, his wife, Chelsea, still runs, I think, the blog and things like that. It's liveyourlegend.net. But just kind of a side note for everyone who's listening in, totally check out the story and check out that stuff too.
Yeah, and that video, sorry to cut you off there, Zephan, but that video is how I discovered his work. I was wasting time at work on YouTube like we do.
Yeah.
and that popped up in the sort of recommended videos on the side. And it was between that video and the Steve Jobs speech, which really got me to sort of take the leap.
That's awesome.
So yeah, we can probably link it up in the show notes, but if anyone hasn't watched those two videos, I really recommend doing so.
So let's jump into just kind of what happened with you and your dad, because I think this is a big deal for a lot of the people listening in, is whether or not you're thinking of, bringing this up to a spouse, to a loved one, to a family member, whoever it is. Chances are a lot of fear comes into play, when you're going to make this big decision that seems, completely irrational sometimes. What were you thinking was going to happen? Because clearly your dad was cool with it, it sounds like. But, what was going on in your mind before you wrote this text to him of like, I'm going to quit my job?
Yeah, and I think it's a unique challenge that people our age or in our generation have to face if they do decide to do things unconventionally, is that, our parents and their parents and everyone before, they've never had as many options or opportunities as we do now, and especially doing non-conventional things. I mean, even something like being a social media manager or something like that didn't exist 10 years ago.
Right.
So I think it's quite unique for us to have to try and explain to people in older generations the path we're taking. But I'm sure our kids one day will be a lot easier if they decide to do something unconventional.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a really good question because, like I said, I was terrified as to what he would say, and I don't even know how I would have gone about things if he'd said like, "You're not resigning." But he didn't. And another thing that I didn't mention is he also said to me, Mom and I will always support you, and we know that you'll make the right decision. And that was also huge for me. But I guess, I've always been sort of not an overachiever, but I've always worked hard, and when I commit to something, I stick it out. And I guess he could see that I wasn't just going to quit my job and live on a couch for 6 months or a year or whatever it may be. So I think he kind of knew that I'd figure things out. And the other thing as well is that I also had told myself if things got really bad, and I think Tim Ferriss speaks about this as well, like with the whole Stoic philosophy thing, is like the worst that can actually happen is a lot better than we think. Mm-hmm. The worst that could happen is I really didn't figure things out, and I ended up going and getting a job back at my same company. Like that's probably the worst that could have happened.
Right.
Because when I left on really good terms, and my boss said to me, if you change your mind, we'll always be here. And so I don't know. I guess, and I've really taken a detour on this question, but I guess my dad kind of knew that I would figure things out, and I think he's also just accepted that I'm the sort of black sheep and that I do things a little differently now. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's okay. We all do things a little bit differently. I think that's why, so many of us wind up in this space of, this quarter life area of I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing, and I really want to put this as like the headline on my website when people go there now, but the biggest thing is that I realized you can only try and please your parents for so long. And if my mom and dad listen to this, I'm sorry, but that is the truth. You can only make people happy for so long before you have to think, well, what is actually going to make me happy?
Right.
And the sort of thing my sort of slogan, that I said to myself at that time, and which I want to put on my website now, is I realized that no one's going to make life awesome for me. And if I really want to do something different or want something particular in my life, it's me that has to go out and make that happen. It's not someone else isn't going to go and put it on my plate and say, there you go, Brian, you wanted this, there it is.
Right.
So that was a big shift for me as well. It's like, well, you know what? I want something different, and it's not going to come to me by doing what I've just always been doing.
Well, and so one of the things that you ended up choosing to do was to travel, and I think this is a big thing for many people. I spent 2 months traveling, and that led to a lot of the bigger changes in my life. How did you change as a person from, the Brian who jumped on the plane and was watching The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and, to the Brian who is taking the plane back home at the end of the trip? Like, what changed for
Reluctantly. I think I would have booked a one-way ticket had I known it would have been so cool.
Yeah.
Oh man, I have been asked this before, and you mentioned I interviewed Smiley. I also interviewed Brian Drury, who I think's been on your show,
yeah.
and I was on his show too. And I think he asked me the same sort of question. How did traveling change me or affect me? I think one of the biggest things was probably that it just opened my eyes to the fact that there's so much out there and so many more opportunities than the small sort of bubble that we live in. And you also, one of the things that stood out to me is that you realize like people are inherently good and people want to help. And I think often we think that the whole world is against us. But that to me was a big one. I don't know. I think hustling with Bangkok tuk-tuk drivers and tailors and massage parlor owners, it taught me a lot of patience as well. And I mean, I don't really know what else other than those few things. Definitely the whole thing of the fact that there's so much more out there. To see and to do. But the other thing and the other shift that I've had more recently, which I spoke to Jacob Sokol about in my latest podcast interview, was that you hear a lot of people saying, like, I just want to go travel and, I want to go and see the world. And I don't take anything away from that. I never understood it myself until I'd actually done it. But I think it's very important to get clear on why it is that you want to travel and not just think that it's sort of a golden ticket to solving all your problems. And the thing that Jacob said is it's not so much the traveling that people are looking for, but it's the thing that they get from traveling. So that might be like more freedom or more time or anything like that. But it's important to, before you just go and buy a ticket somewhere across the world, like I think get clear on why it is that you want to travel and see if you can maybe create some of those things already. And another example is like we were chatting before this interview, I recently had some big decisions to make in my life about whether I was going to go overseas for a longer period of time, sort of indefinitely almost. And I did kind of a pro and con type of thing about going overseas. And I realized that a lot of the things that I thought I wanted to get out of going overseas, I could already achieve right here. And that was things like, spending time with more positive sort of people around me, designing my own schedule. And I realized like all that stuff I can do here already. And in fact, there were a lot of things that I could do here already that I couldn't do overseas. And I'm sure that'll depend person to person and where it is you go and all the rest of it. But that's why I said, like, I think it's very important to people, for people to get clear on that stuff before they just think that they'll be happy when they go traveling.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point there, is that a lot of people think that they'll just travel and it fixes everything. And it doesn't. Your problems that you had at home are still going to be there when you get back home. I think traveling opens you up to looking at things kind of outside of that bubble, so if you're in a place of, needing more financial stability, or, needing more money in your business, or, feeling like you need a relationship, what travel does is it kind of pulls you out of that place of need, and it puts you in a totally different environment where you get to kind of look at things from outside the box.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't take anything away from travel. I still absolutely love it, and I will definitely be doing a lot more travel myself. But it's not like I'm relying on that to make me happy.
Right.
And you mentioned something now which I'm about to forget. What was it? I've just said a blank.
It's all good. Well, you were talking a little bit about, you had some big decisions recently. How about we'll round off the podcast with that, with just kind of talking about where things are now, because this is one of the most beautiful points of the podcast where we can really talk to somebody who's in the middle of it. I don't want to be the person who always just shows, everyone who made it, because, it just makes everyone feel bad because they're not there too. I think you're a prime example of someone who's working through this in a really fantastic way and learning so much. So maybe just kind of round off the episode here with a little bit about, where you are right now and some of the bigger decisions you had to make.
Yeah, I'm about to get all Brene Brown vulnerable on you. Yeah, and I love this question because I think with social media and stuff like that, and just online presence in general, it's so easy to look at other people and think, oh, I really want to be doing what they're doing, or oh, they've got everything figured out and their life's so perfect. And yeah, I mean, you said, let us know where you are now. Like, I am still very much in the trenches. I mentioned to you that one of the reasons for starting my podcast was because I wanted to learn from the people that I'm interviewing. And that's exactly true. I wanted to ask some of these things for myself and in the same time share that with other people. So yeah, let's get into it. So the difficult kind of decision I had to make was because I'd kind of quit my corporate job and, basically became self-employed, first with personal training and coaching and online stuff. It's not easy. There are months where you think, like, how am I going to make rent? And some months I didn't make rent. And I took on some debt. And the decision that I had to make was, well, why don't I go and teach English overseas? And I was going to go to South Korea, which I think is a great option for a lot of people. I think it's an awesome way to quickly pay back debt. And a lot of people are doing that very effectively. But for me, the three criteria for whatever I decided to do was, A, to pay back my debts and to make a steady income, to B, have enough time to work on my personal projects and my personal brand and my podcast and coaching. And the third was to sort of give me the freedom to travel a bit. And I did some job searching and stuff, and I actually found a teaching job, a school in Korea. Excuse me. They sent me a contract. All my documents were done. I had the job on my sort of basically in my lap. And I had this really crazy moment where I was like, holy crap, is this actually what I want to be doing? And I paused there because I don't know. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this. I had this moment where I was like, wow, this is all very real now. And it's all right here. The thing that I thought that I wanted so badly. And now, is this actually what I'm looking for? And I kind of, it was a dark time, and I did a lot of brainstorming and am I going to fit everything in and make everything work? And I decided that I wouldn't have enough time to work on my own podcast and coaching, and I wasn't ready to compromise the sort of momentum that I'd built up with that. And I decided to turn down the job, again, not knowing what would come next. In the time since, to kind of wrap it up quicker here, in the time since, I found an online teaching job, which gives me way more time and flexibility to work on my own projects. And like I said, I realized, like, I don't need to go overseas to achieve these things that I'm kind of aiming for. I still have time to take on my own clients. I mentioned to you before that I met and have started dating a new girlfriend, which is an area I've been lacking in for quite a lot of time, and thinking like I can do things alone. But it's made a huge positive impact on me. And the other thing, like I'm moving into my own apartment soon, so things are kind of moving along nicely. But definitely, it's not all like sunshine and roses like it may seem on social media all the time.
Yeah. Well, I think amazing things really happen when you start asking why you're doing the things you are doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, no matter where you are, you know, if you've already taken the leap or if you haven't, you know, why haven't you and why are you still here?
Mm-hmm. And Jim Carrey, I mean, we've spoken about some of my favorite videos, Walter Mitty and Scott Dinsmore and Steve Jobs. And another one I'll throw in the mix there is Jim Carrey's commencement speech, which I'm sure you've seen too.
Absolutely.
And he says in that speech, as far as I can tell, it's just about letting the universe know what you want and working towards it while letting go of how it comes to pass. And that's something that I keep coming back to now. Is like we put so much pressure on ourselves to know exactly how things are going to work out and to know exactly what's coming next and to try have everything perfect. But actually, we can't control any of that. All we can do is like keep that vision of what we're working towards in our head and kind of take things as they come along. And that's been a huge shift for me as well.
That's awesome.
In my own work.
That's awesome. I think that's probably the best way we could round off this episode. So, Brian, I want to thank you for being here today. And what's the best place for everyone tuning in to check out more about you and to learn about what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm lucky in that I don't have a very common name like yourself. I'm pretty much at Brian Teare everywhere. That's BryanTeare. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, I'm not as busy. I'm trying to get into Snapchat now. But then the best is probably just brianteare.com, and I'm sure we'll link that up in the show notes. And otherwise, people can email me, brian@brianteare.com. And I'd love to hear from people if they dug this episode, if they've enjoyed my show, if they just want to ask me something, if they're struggling with, the quarter life crisis. I'd love to hear and help anywhere I can. And I always love meeting new sort of switched on, engaged people, which is definitely the Year of Purpose listener. So Zephan, thanks so much for having me, and thanks to everyone for listening.
So there you have it, guys and girls. That wraps up episode 33 of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. And big thanks again to Zephan for having me on the Year of Purpose podcast. I highly encourage you to go take a listen. If you liked this episode, please share it around with your friends and shoot me a tweet at Brian Teare to let me know some of your biggest takeaways. For me, the biggest thing that I want to reiterate is no one is going to make your life awesome for you. So what that means is if you have a big goal or a big dream or a big vision for your life, it's up to you to go out and make it happen and do things a little differently to get the results that you're looking for. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this one at brianteare.com/033. And just thanks once again for being here and inserting me in your ears every week. Until next week, guys, keep creating your quarter life comeback.
Thanks for listening to the Quarter Life Comeback. Get started today by visiting brianteare.com.